The hunted widow. She arrived at his door with a dying baby and bruises she thought no one could see. But Caleb Warden had spent 3 years learning to recognize the marks grief leaves on a person. The difference was, hers were still bleeding. When the tracker rode into his yard 5 days later, asking if he'd seen a woman with a child that don't belong to her, Caleb understood two things instantly. Markel wasn't running from bad luck, and the men hunting her wouldn't stop until one of them was dead. What he didn't understand yet was why he'd already decided it wouldn't be her. Before we begin, if you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this tale has traveled. Now let's step into the Wyoming heat of 1884, where some ghosts walk in broad daylight. The notice had been pinned outside Garrison's general store for 11 days before Caleb admitted to himself that nobody was coming. Ranch cook needed. Room and board. Fair pay. No nonsense. He'd written it in his own hand, brief and plain, because that's what honest work deserved. The paper had curled at the edges under the relentless Wyoming sun, the ink fading to brown where the light hit it hardest. Every time Caleb rode into town for supplies, he saw it there, fluttering against the weathered wood like something alive. And every time, the shame burned a little deeper. 3 years. 3 years since he'd lost Eleanor to the fever that swept through the valley, taking a dozen souls and leaving twice as many half alive. 3 years since he'd sealed up the rooms she'd filled with laughter and light, letting dust settle where her hands had once smoothed quilts and arranged wildflowers. 3 years of cooking his own tasteless meals, mending his own clothes with crooked stitches, and speaking only to his horses because they didn't expect anything more than oats and water. The ranch still functioned, barely. The cattle grazed, the fences held, the barn kept the weather out. But the house had become a tomb he happened to sleep in. Caleb stood now on his porch in the copper light of late August, watching heat shimmer off the road that cut through his property like a scar. The air was thick enough to chew, heavy with the scent of sun-baked earth and the distant promise of thunderheads building over the mountains. Cicadas screamed from the cottonwoods that lined the creek, their song rising and falling in waves that matched the pulse behind his eyes. He was 42 years old and felt 70. The sound came just after sundown, when the sky had bruised itself purple and the first stars were pricking through. Caleb almost missed it, a soft, hesitant tap against wood that could have been a branch in the wind or a bird striking the window. But there was no wind, and the second tap was deliberate. He crossed the main room in 4 strides, hand automatically checking the rifle mounted above the door, a habit from years when Sioux raiding parties were more than distant memory. When he pulled the door open, ready to tell whatever drifter or lost traveler to move along, the words died in his throat. She stood in a pool of failing light, swaying slightly as if the act of remaining upright required more strength than she possessed. Young, maybe 25, with dark hair plastered to her skull by sweat and dust, and eyes that held the particular emptiness of someone who'd run until running was the only thing left. Her dress had once been decent calico, but now it hung in tatters around her ankles, more holes than fabric. Both sleeves were pushed to her elbows, revealing arms marked with bruises in various stages of healing, purple, green, yellow, a calendar of violence written on skin. But it was the bundle in her arms that made Caleb's heart lurch. The baby. It had to be a baby, though the blanket around it was so thin and stained he could see the tiny form barely moving, made a sound somewhere between a whimper and a rattling breath. The woman's lips were cracked and bleeding, her face gaunt enough that the bones beneath seemed too sharp, too close to the surface. "Please," the word came out as broken glass. "Just tonight. I can work. She swayed harder, and Caleb moved without thinking, catching her elbow as her knees buckled. The baby wailed then, a weak sound that any cattleman would recognize as the cry of something dying. "Inside!" Caleb guided her through the door, kicking it shut behind them. "Sit." He steered her to the chair nearest the cold stove, Eleanor's chair, the one he hadn't let himself look at directly in 3 years, and she collapsed into it like someone had cut her strings. The baby's crying had subsided to a desperate mewling that was somehow worse than screaming. Caleb lit 2 lamps with hands that had forgotten how to shake, then moved to the pump at the sink. The water came up cool and clear, and he filled a cup, brought it to her. "Drink." Slowly. She took it with trembling fingers, sipped, then drained half the cup before he could stop her. The baby, you nursing? A flush of shame crossed her hollow face. I tried. There's nothing left. Caleb moved to the pantry, pulled down the tin of condensed milk he kept for coffee, mixed it with warm water in proportions he remembered from calving season. He soaked a clean cloth in the mixture, brought it to the woman. Let him suck on this. Not too fast or he'll... But she already knew. She pressed the cloth to the baby's mouth with the careful desperation of someone who'd been doing exactly this for days, maybe weeks. The infant latched on, making small, frantic sounds as the milk soaked into its mouth. In the lamplight, Caleb could see them both clearly now. The woman's hands were raw, fingernails torn. Her feet were bare beneath the ruined hem of her dress, soles blackened and split. She'd been walking through wilderness, not road. And the baby, Jesus, the baby couldn't be more than 2 months old, its skin pale and papery, eyes too large in a face that should have been round with health. How long you been traveling? Caleb heard himself ask. 6 days. Her voice was steadier now, though her eyes never left the baby's face. On foot, since the tree line. She nodded vaguely east toward the mountains. 20 miles minimum, through terrain that would challenge a healthy man with supplies. She'd done it starving, carrying an infant, in heat that had killed 3 horses in the valley that summer alone. What's your name? She hesitated, and in that pause, Caleb saw her calculating whether truth or lies would serve her better. Finally, Mara Kell. This is Noah. You running from the law? No. The word came fast, certain. But I'm running. Caleb studied her face. The bruises, the fear that sat behind her eyes like something with teeth, the way her body was angled even now toward the door despite her exhaustion. He'd seen rabbits look less hunted. Your husband? Was. Her jaw tightened. He fell during the chase. I didn't stop to check if he was breathing. Honest, then, or desperate enough that lying seemed pointless. Caleb appreciated both options more than he should. You got people? Family? Had a sister in Cheyenne. She died birthing her second child last winter. Mara adjusted the cloth, and Noah sucked harder, small sounds of contentment starting to replace the crying. No one else. The house settled around them, timbers creaking as they cooled from the day's heat. Through the window, Caleb could see the first flicker of lightning over the mountains, the storms that had been threatening all week finally making good on their promise. He should turn her out. That was the sensible thing. A strange woman with a questionable past and men potentially following wasn't his problem. He had cattle to tend, fences to mend, his own ghost to keep him company. Taking her in was asking for trouble, and Caleb Warden had learned through hard experience that trouble never came alone. But Noah had stopped crying. And Mara was looking at her son with an expression Caleb recognized from mirrors on his worst days. The desperate hope of someone who'd given up praying for miracles but couldn't quite stop hoping for them anyway. You said you can work. You said you can... Mara's head snapped up. Yes, anything. I can cook, clean, mend. I'm not afraid of rooms upstairs, second door, used to be. He stopped, swallowed. It's clean, bed's made. You'll share the pump out back for washing. Privy's 20 yards south. Meals are at dawn and dusk. I expect the house kept decent and food that doesn't poison me. Pays $3 a week plus keep. She stared at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. I can't. You can pay it forward when you're able. Or not. I don't keep close accounts. Caleb moved toward the stairs, lighting a third lamp. Come on. You need rest more than you need details. Mara stood slowly, Noah clutched to her chest, the cloth still pressed to his mouth. She followed Caleb up the narrow staircase, her steps uncertain on wood that groaned under even her slight weight. He pushed open the door to what had been their guest room, the one Eleanor had always kept ready for the children she'd sworn they'd eventually have. The room was exactly as he'd left it 3 years ago. Quilt smoothed tight over the bed, curtains drawn against dust, a small dresser with a basin and pitcher. The air smelled stale but not unpleasant, like dried lavender and old hopes. There's water in the pitcher. I'll bring up more in the morning, along with proper milk for the boy. Caleb set the lamp on the dresser. Anything you need before... Why? Mara's voice cracked. You don't know me. I could be lying about everything. Caleb paused in the doorway, looking back at her. She stood in the middle of the room like something conjured from desperation itself, this half-starved woman with her dying baby and her questions that deserved better answers than he had. My wife used to say that people don't usually end up on your doorstep by accident. He gripped the doorframe. Said it was the world's way of asking if you're paying attention. What if the world's wrong? Then I'll deal with it when it comes. He nodded toward his bed. Sleep, Mrs. Kell. Tomorrow's soon enough for worry. He left before she could respond, pulling the door shut behind him with a soft click that echoed through the hollow house like a gunshot. Downstairs, Caleb stood at the window and watched lightning split the sky over the mountains, counting the seconds until thunder rolled across the valley. The storms were getting closer. By midnight, they'd be here, turning the road to mud and the creek to a torrent that would cut the ranch off from town for at least 2 days. If someone was following Mara Kell, they'd have to wait. And if she'd been lying, if this was some elaborate con or if her husband wasn't dead and came looking, well, Caleb still had his rifle, and 3 years of being alone had taught him that some silences were worth defending. He poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey from the bottle he'd been rationing since Eleanor died, drained it in one swallow, and tried not to think about how the house already felt different. How the sound of someone else breathing upstairs made the darkness seem less absolute. How Noah's crying had reminded him that not everything that was broken stayed that way forever. The first drops of rain hit the roof just before midnight, fat and heavy, drumming a rhythm that built into a roar as the storm finally broke. Caleb sat in Eleanor's chair, his chair now, he supposed, and listened to water pour from the eaves, washing away dust and heat and the last traces of the person he'd been before a desperate woman knocked on his door. By morning, the world would be different. He just didn't know yet how much. Dawn came soft and pink, the storm having scrubbed the sky clean during the night. Caleb woke in his own bed. He'd managed to climb the stairs to his room around 2, though he had no memory of the journey, and lay listening to the sounds of the ranch stirring. Roosters, cattle lowing in the distance, the creek running high and fast from the rain. And something else, something new. Footsteps, light ones, moving carefully across the floor above his head. Mara was awake. Caleb dressed quickly, splashed water on his face from the basin, and descended to find his kitchen transformed. Not dramatically, the changes were small, almost invisible, but the dishes he'd left in the sink were washed and stacked. The floor had been swept. The table, which had held a permanent layer of grime disguised as seasoning, was scrubbed clean. And there was coffee. Real coffee. Boiling in the pot on the stove, filling the air with a smell he'd half forgotten. I hope you don't mind. Mara stood near the pantry, Noah asleep against her shoulder in a sling she'd fashioned from what looked like part of her petticoat. She'd washed, braided her hair, and changed into... Caleb blinked. That's Eleanor's dress. I found it in the room. Mine was... She gestured helplessly at the rags she'd arrived in, now folded neatly on a chair. I'll wash this one and put it back. I just needed... Keep it. The words came out harder than he intended. She'd want it used. Mara studied him with those 2 sharp eyes, seeing more than he wanted to show, then nodded. Thank you. The dress fit her poorly. Eleanor had been taller, broader through the shoulders, but it was whole and clean, and that seemed to matter more than Caleb wanted to admit. Mara moved to the stove, poured coffee into 2 cups with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent years managing a household. I made biscuits, she said, nodding toward a plate covered with a cloth. Found flour and lard in the pantry. They're not... I'm better with more to work with, but they're edible. Caleb took one, bit into it, and felt something in his chest crack open. They were better than edible. They were good, light and flaky with just the right amount of salt. The kind of biscuits Eleanor used to make Sunday mornings when they were first married and she was still trying to prove she could run a frontier household. These are fine, he managed. They ate in silence, Mara standing because sitting seemed to make her nervous, Caleb at the table because he didn't know what else to do. Noah slept through it all, his breathing deeper and more regular than the night before, color starting to return to his small face. I need to ride out today, Caleb said finally. Check the herd after the storm. You'll be alone. I can manage. Mara refilled his coffee without asking. Is there anything particular you need done? House could use airing. Bedrooms upstairs. You can open them up. Clean what needs cleaning. Just... He stopped, searched for words. Just don't throw anything away without asking. Understanding flickered across her face. I won't. Caleb stood, carried his plate to the sink, and reached for his hat. At the door, he paused. If anyone comes asking questions, I'm your cook. Been here 2 weeks. Don't know anything about anything else. Mara met his eyes steadily. I'm not going to bring trouble to your door if I can help it, Mr. Warden. Caleb. Caleb. She tested the name, and something about hearing it in another person's voice made the house feel even stranger. And I'm Mara, if we're being honest. Honest's good. He settled his hat. I'll be back before dark. The day passed in hard work and long silences. Caleb found 2 steers bogged down in a wash the storm had flooded, spent 3 hours getting them free and back with the herd. He mended a section of fence the wind had knocked over, checked water sources, and counted cattle until his eyes burned from the sun. But through it all, part of his mind stayed fixed on the ranch house, wondering what he'd find when he returned, wondering if she'd still be there. She was. Not just there, but embedded in the space like she'd been there for months instead of a day. The windows were open, curtains billowing in the evening breeze. The smell of cooking, real cooking, not just beans and coffee, drifted from the kitchen. When Caleb stepped inside, he found the main room transformed, furniture polished, floors scrubbed, the cobwebs that had gathered in corners swept away like bad memories. And Mara stood at the stove, stirring something in a pot that made his stomach clench with hunger. Noah sleeping in a wooden crate she'd lined with blankets, and positioned near enough to watch but far enough from the heat to be safe. I found carrots in the cellar, she said without turning around, and an onion that was more sprout than onion, but I made it work. There's not much meat, so it's mostly vegetable stew, but it smells good. It's simple. She finally looked at him, and Caleb saw the fear still there beneath the competence. The fear that he'd changed his mind, that this fragile safety she'd found would evaporate like morning dew. I hope it's enough. They ate at the table, both of them sitting this time, while the sun painted the western sky in shades of orange and gold. The stew was better than good. It was the kind of meal that made a house feel like a home, even if the home was haunted and the people in it were strangers. You said you didn't stop to check if your husband was breathing, Caleb said into the comfortable silence. You want to tell me the rest? Mara set down her spoon carefully, as if sudden movements might shatter the moment. Not particularly. Fair enough. But she kept talking anyway, the words spilling out like water from a cracked dam. His name was Silas Kell. We married when I was 19. He seemed kind enough, and I had no prospects and no family to advise otherwise. For a while it was tolerable. Then Noah came, and Silas decided the baby wasn't his. Was he? Yes. No hesitation, no doubt. But Silas had gotten it into his head that I'd been unfaithful, that Noah was proof of my betrayal. Nothing I said made a difference. The night I ran, he'd beaten me until I couldn't stand, then went for Noah. Said he'd fix the problem himself. Caleb's hands tightened on his spoon. So you ran. I grabbed Noah and ran. Silas came after us. We fought at the edge of a ravine. I pushed him. He fell. I heard him hit the rocks below, heard him stop moving, but I didn't climb down to check. I just ran. Good. She looked up sharply. Good? Man tries to kill your baby. You stop him however you can. And you don't waste time checking his pulse. Caleb met her eyes. You did right. Something in Mara's face shifted, attention releasing, a weight lifting. Most people wouldn't see it that way. Most people are fools. A sound that might have been a laugh escaped her. Perhaps. They finished eating as the light faded and the evening chorus of crickets and frogs rose from the creek. Mara washed dishes while Caleb checked the stock, and when he came back inside, she was settling Noah in the crate for the night, humming something low and tuneless that was more feeling than melody. I cleaned your wife's room, she said quietly. I hope that was all right. It seemed wrong to leave it sealed up when the rest of the house was breathing again. Caleb stood frozen, one hand on the doorframe. You went in there. I can close it back up if you... No. The word came out rough. No, it's fine. But he climbed the stairs anyway, unable to stop himself, and pushed open the door to the room he hadn't entered in 3 years. It looked the same, and completely different. The dust was gone, the windows open, the quilt smoothed neat across the bed where Eleanor had died while he held her hand and begged her to stay. Her hairbrush still sat on the dresser, silver and tortoiseshell, with a few long dark hairs still caught in the bristles. Her shawl hung on the hook by the window. Her Bible lay on the bedside table, open to Psalms. But the air didn't smell like death anymore. It smelled like sunlight and soap, and the possibility that grief didn't have to be a permanent resident. Caleb stood in the doorway until full dark, then closed the door gently and returned downstairs to find Mara watching him with careful eyes. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not asking permission first. I'd have said no." She nodded slowly. "Sometimes we need people to be braver than we can manage on our own." They stood in the lamplight, this broken rancher and this hunted woman, and the house settled around them like something deciding whether to trust what was happening inside its walls. Outside, the creek sang its storm-swollen song, and somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called to the rising moon. The night was warm and clear, stars scattered across the sky like spilled salt, and for the first time in 3 years, Caleb Warden went to sleep knowing someone else was breathing under his roof. Knowing he wasn't quite so alone anymore. And if part of him wondered whether he was making a terrible mistake, whether Mara's past would come calling with violence in its eyes, he pushed that thought aside for tomorrow. Tonight, there was stew in his belly and clean floors under his feet, and a baby sleeping peacefully in a house that had forgotten what peace sounded like. Tonight, that was enough. The pattern established itself over the following days like water finding its course through stone. Slowly at first, then with increasing certainty. Mara rose before dawn, had coffee ready when Caleb came down, and managed the house with a quiet efficiency that required no instruction. She seemed to understand instinctively which spaces wanted attention and which needed to be left alone, which objects could be moved and which were sacred. Caleb found himself noticing details he'd stopped seeing years ago, the way morning light slanted through the kitchen window, the particular creak of the third stair, the sound of another person's footsteps moving through rooms that had held only echoes. On the 4th morning, he came downstairs to find her standing at the window with Noah against her shoulder, both of them watching the sun climb over the eastern hills. She didn't turn when he entered, just kept staring out at the land like she was trying to memorize it. "You ever work a ranch before?" Caleb asked, pouring himself coffee. "My father had a small holding in Nebraska. Nothing like this." She shifted Noah to her other shoulder. "But I know how to work. My hands aren't afraid of it." "I can see that." He'd noticed her hands, raw and calloused, nails broken from years of labor that had nothing to do with gentleness. "You said your sister died birthing her second child." "Last February. I got the letter 3 weeks after it happened. By the time I could have traveled, she was already buried." Mara's voice went flat. "Silas wouldn't let me go to the funeral. Said it was too far, too expensive, too much trouble for a dead woman who couldn't benefit from my grief." "That when things got worse?" "That's when I stopped pretending they might get better." She finally turned from the window. "What about you? How long has it been?" 3 years. Fever took her in the space of a week. One day she was planning spring planning, the next she couldn't get out of bed. Caleb stared into his coffee. "Doctor said half the valley had it. Most survived. Eleanor didn't." "I'm sorry." "Me too." They stood in the growing light, two people carrying losses that couldn't be set down, couldn't be fixed, could only be carried until the weight became familiar enough to bear. Noah made a small sound, and Mara adjusted him with practiced ease. The baby had filled out in just 4 days, his skin losing that papery quality, eyes brighter and more alert. Whatever Mara was feeding him from Caleb's condensed milk supply was working. "I need to ride into town today," Caleb said. "Pick up supplies." "You need anything?" Mara hesitated, then reached into her apron pocket and withdrew a small cloth bundle. When she unwrapped it, 3 silver dollars gleamed against the fabric, worn and dented, but real currency. "I found these sewn into the lining of my dress." Silas never knew I had them. She held them out. Could you buy fabric, enough for proper clothes for Noah? And maybe thread, needles, if they're not too dear? Caleb didn't take the money. Keep it. I'll add it to the supply run. I can't let you. You're working for room and board. Room and board includes what's necessary. He saw her about to protest and added, You can pay me back when your wages accumulate. Or not. Either way, the boy needs clothes. She closed her hand around the coins, eyes bright with something that might have been tears. Thank you. It's just fabric. No. Her voice was soft but certain. It's not. Caleb left an hour later, the supply list in his pocket and a strange reluctance pulling at him as he rode away from the ranch. He'd made this trip 100 times in the past 3 years, usually grateful for the escape from his empty house. Today felt different. Today he was leaving something behind that mattered. Garrison's General Store sat on the main street of Red Creek, a town that consisted of one street, 2 saloons, a church, a hotel, and a handful of businesses that served the surrounding ranches. Caleb tied his horse and pushed through the door, the bell chiming overhead in a sound that had been the same since he was a boy accompanying his father on similar errands. Walter Garrison stood behind the counter, same as always, though more gray had crept into his beard since Caleb had last paid attention. Caleb Warden. Been a while. Walter. Caleb handed over the list. Need all this, plus 5 yards of sturdy cotton and sewing notions. Walter's eyebrows rose as he scanned the list. This is twice what you usually order. And fabric? You taking up needlework? Hired a cook. Did you now? Walter's expression shifted to something calculating. That notice was up for near 2 weeks. Who finally took you up on it? Widow from Nebraska. Good worker. Caleb kept his voice neutral. She's got a baby needs proper clothes. Widow with a baby. Walter pulled items from shelves, his movements deliberate. She got a name? Mrs. Kell. Kell. Walter tested it. Don't know any Kells. She got people in the territory? Had a sister in Cheyenne, passed last winter. Caleb could feel the conversation turning, the way small-town curiosity always turned when something new appeared. You got the fabric or not? Got it. Walter disappeared into the back room, and Caleb used the moment to study the other customers. 2 ranch hands he recognized, a woman he didn't, and May Hollander examining ribbons near the window. May was Eleanor's oldest friend, a woman who'd homesteaded with her husband 30 years back and outlived him by 15. She ran a boarding house on the edge of town and had the kind of sharp eyes that missed nothing worth knowing. She looked up as if sensing his attention. Caleb Warden. Heard you finally found yourself some help. Word traveled faster than prairie fire in Red Creek. News sure does spread. Small town? Big ears? May set down the ribbons and approached. Walter's in back trying to figure out how to ask if this widow's respectable without sounding like a gossip. Is she? Respectable. Caleb met May's gaze. Far as I can tell. Works hard, keeps to herself, takes good care of her boy. That's not what I asked. It's what I'm answering. May studied him the way she used to study Eleanor, looking for cracks, for places where concern might be needed. Eleanor would be glad you're not living like a hermit anymore. I was never a hermit. You were 3 bad days from it. May's voice gentled. I'm not criticizing, just observing. And if this Mrs. Kell is helping you remember how to be human again, then I'm grateful to her. Walter returned with the fabric before Caleb could respond, spreading the cotton across the counter. This do? It's fine. Caleb watched Walter tally the supplies, writing figures in his ledger with careful precision. How much? $12, 40 cents. Caleb counted out the money, aware of May still watching, still assessing. He gathered the packages, nodded to them both, and was almost to the door when May spoke again. Caleb? If she needs anything, woman things, company, help with the baby, you send her to me. Boarding house is always open. I'll tell her. Outside, Caleb loaded the supplies into his saddlebags and was checking the cinch when a rider he didn't recognize walked past. Tall man, maybe 40, with the kind of hard eyes that suggested he'd learned to spot weakness from a distance. The man glanced at Caleb's horse, at the packages, then away. But something in that look made Caleb's instincts prickle. He mounted and rode out of town at an easy pace, but his hand stayed near the rifle in its scabbard all the way home. Mara was hanging laundry when he returned, Noah sleeping in the wooden crate positioned in a patch of shade near the house. She'd washed every piece of fabric she could find, curtains, dish towels, even the saddle blankets that had been gathering dust in the barn. They snapped and billowed in the hot wind, white against the blue sky. "You've been busy," Caleb said, dismounting. "Seemed like everything needed sun and air." She took one of the packages he offered. "What's this?" "Fabric, needles, thread, whatever else Walter thought you'd need." He watched her unwrap it, saw her fingers trace the cotton like it was silk. "There's more in the saddlebags." "You bought enough to clothe an army." "Bought enough to do the job right." Caleb carried the rest of the supplies inside, Mara following with the fabric cradled against her chest. "Met a friend of my wife's in town, May Hollander. Runs the boarding house. Said if you needed anything, company, help, whatever, you should visit." That's kind of her." Mara set the fabric on the table, smoothing it carefully. "Did people ask questions?" "Some." "And you told them?" "That you're my cook, that you're a widow from Nebraska, that you're a good worker." Caleb unpacked flour, sugar, coffee. "Also saw a man I didn't recognize, tall, hard-looking, rode a buckskin mare with a white star." The color drained from Mara's face. "That's Fletcher, one of Silas's men." "You sure?" "I'd know that horse anywhere. Silas won it in a card game, gave it to Fletcher because he was useful." Her hands gripped the table edge. "If he's here, he's looking. Silas must have survived the fall." Caleb felt something cold settle in his gut. Or Fletcher's looking for revenge. "Either way, they won't stop." Mara's voice had gone hollow. "I should leave, tonight, before he tracks me here." "Where would you go?" "I don't know. Anywhere. Montana, Oregon, Mexico. It doesn't matter as long as it's away from here." "And you think a woman alone with a baby won't be noticed? That you'll make it 50 miles before someone asks questions you can't answer?" Caleb finished unpacking, his movements deliberate. "You stay. We deal with this. This isn't your fight." "You're under my roof. That makes it my fight." He met her eyes. "Unless you want to leave. If you do, I won't stop you. But if you stay, we do this smart." Mara looked at Noah, still sleeping peacefully in his crate, then back at Caleb. "Why would you risk this? You don't know me. Don't owe me anything." "Maybe I'm tired of letting fear make my decisions." The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise her. "Maybe I'm tired of living like the only thing that matters is not getting hurt again." They stood in the kitchen while the curtains dried outside and the afternoon heat pressed against the windows. Finally, Mara nodded. "All right, we stay. But if it comes to violence, I've got 2 rifles, a shotgun, and a Colt that belonged to my father. This ranch has been defended before." Caleb moved toward the door. "I'm going to check the perimeter, make sure we don't have any surprises waiting. You keep Noah inside, and if anyone comes before I'm back, you bar this door and don't open it for anyone but me." "Caleb," he paused. "Thank you." He nodded and stepped out into the blazing afternoon, his mind already cataloging sightlines, cover positions, approaches a hostile rider might use. The ranch suddenly felt more exposed than it had in years. Every tree line a potential hiding place, every rise in the land a vantage point. He'd meant what he said to Mara. Fear had ruled him for 3 years. Fear of loss, fear of connection, fear of hoping for anything beyond simple survival. But watching her unwrap that fabric like it was a gift worth treasuring had reminded him that survival wasn't the same as living. And if living meant defending this fragile piece they'd built in the span of 4 days, then he'd defend it. The question was whether Fletcher was scouting or whether more men would come, whether this was reconnaissance or the beginning of something worse. Caleb completed his circuit of the ranch in 90 minutes, finding nothing suspicious but taking note of places that would need watching. When he returned to the house, Mara had started supper, beans and salt pork, simple but filling, and Noah was awake, making small cooing sounds as she worked. They ate quickly, both of them listening to the sounds of the evening settling around them. When full dark came, Caleb loaded both rifles and positioned them near the doors, then checked that the windows were secure. "You know how to shoot?" he asked. "Silas taught me. Said a ranch wife should be able to defend herself. Mara's mouth twisted. Ironic, considering who I ended up needing to defend myself from. That can you hit what you aim at? If it's close enough and not moving too fast. Good enough. Caleb showed her where the rifles were, how to reload quickly, where to position herself if trouble came. Someone approaches the house, you wake me first. Don't fire unless you have to, but if you have to, don't hesitate. You think they'll come tonight? I think Fletcher wasn't in town by accident, and I think if Silas is alive and knows you're here, he won't wait long. Caleb checked the shotgun one more time. But we'll be ready. That night, Caleb lay in his bed listening to the house breathe around him. The creak of timbers, the whisper of wind through cracks he'd been meaning to seal, the distant sounds of Mara moving quietly in the room above. He didn't sleep so much as drift, one part of his mind always alert for sounds that didn't belong. Dawn came without incident, but the tension didn't ease. If anything, it wound tighter. The day passed in careful routine. Mara worked through the fabric, cutting and stitching small garments for Noah, while Caleb maintained his normal schedule, tending cattle, mending fence, doing the 100 small tasks that kept a ranch functioning. But he stayed closer to the house than usual, and his rifle stayed within reach. It was May Hollander who brought the warning. She arrived mid-afternoon in her wagon, ostensibly to deliver a basket of preserves, but really to satisfy her curiosity and offer whatever help she thought was needed. Caleb met her in the yard, and Mara came to the door with Noah, wiping flour from her hands. "Mrs. Hollander," Caleb said. "This is Mara Kell." Mara, May Hollander. The women studied each other with the frankness of those who'd learned not to waste time on pleasantries when truth was required. May saw the bruises still fading on Mara's arms, the wariness in her eyes. Mara saw the sharp intelligence in May's face, the kindness that lived alongside it. "You're the widow from Nebraska," May said. "Yes, ma'am." "And that's your boy." "Noah. He's 2 months old." May climbed down from the wagon with the ease of someone half her age and approached the porch. "Might I hold him?" Mara hesitated, then handed Noah over, watching carefully as May settled the baby against her shoulder with practiced confidence. "You've done this before." "Raised 4 of my own, helped deliver 24 more." May swayed slightly, and Noah made a contented sound. "This is a healthy baby now, but he wasn't when you arrived, was he?" "No, ma'am." May looked at Caleb. "Man came into the boarding house last night. Tall fellow, hard eyes, riding a buckskin with a white star. Asked if I'd seen a woman with a baby. Said she was his brother's wife, that his brother had been injured and was frantic to find her." The air seemed to crystallize around them. Mara's face went white, and Caleb's hand moved instinctively toward the rifle, leaning against the porch rail. "What did you tell him?" Caleb asked. "I told him I hadn't seen anyone fitting that description, but that I'd keep my eyes open." May handed Noah back to Mara. "Then I told him the boarding house was full and he'd have to try the hotel. I also mentioned that Sheriff Dawson doesn't take kindly to strangers asking too many questions about local folks." "Is there a Sheriff Dawson?" Mara asked quietly. "Was. Died 8 years ago, but Fletcher didn't need to know that." May's eyes were sharp. "Now, you want to tell me what's really happening here, or do you want to keep pretending this is about a concerned family reunion?" Caleb looked at Mara, who nodded slightly. They moved inside, and over coffee at the kitchen table, Mara told her story. The marriage, the violence, the escape, the fall that may or may not have killed Silas Kell. May listened without interrupting, her expression growing grimmer as the details emerged. "And you didn't report it to any law?" May asked when Mara finished. "I didn't know if he was dead, and if he wasn't, his word would carry more weight than mine. He's well connected in Montana, has friends in territorial offices." "I'm no one." Mara's voice was steady. "I knew running was the only choice that might work." "Running would have worked if you'd had more of a head start," May said. "Now they've found you." "I'll leave tonight," Mara said immediately. "I won't bring this down on Caleb or on Red Creek." "Where exactly would you go that a determined man couldn't follow?" May's tone was practical. "You made it here on desperation and luck. You won't make it another 20 miles. "Then what do you suggest?" May looked at Caleb. "You willing to stand for her?" "Already am." "Even if it means trouble with men who won't fight fair?" Especially then. May nodded slowly. All right, here's what needs to happen. First, we establish Mara's been here longer than 4 days. 2 weeks sounds about right. Anyone asks, she answered your notice and has been working the ranch since mid-August. Second, we make sure people see her in town, see her with Noah, see that she's settled and legitimate. Third, we wait and see what Fletcher does next. He can't just ride onto your property and take her without cause, and if he tries, we make sure there are witnesses who can testify to what really happened. You do that? Mara's voice cracked. Lie for me? I'd tell the truth for you, that you're a woman trying to protect her child from a violent man. The timeline is just details. May stood, gathering her shawl. But understand this. If Silas Kell is alive and comes for you, it won't be pretty. Are you prepared for that? I don't have a choice. Everyone has choices. The question is which ones you can live with. May moved toward the door, then paused. Caleb, you got enough ammunition? Enough. Get more anyway, and keep your eyes open. Men like Fletcher don't work alone. She looked at Mara. You did the right thing leaving. Don't let anyone make you doubt that. After May left, the house felt smaller, the walls thinner. Caleb walked the perimeter again while Mara finished Noah's clothes, her needle flashing in the lamplight as shadows gathered in the corners. When Caleb came back inside, he found her sitting at the table with a completed tiny shirt in her hands, tears streaming silently down her face. Mara, I keep thinking, if I just stayed quiet, if I just endured it, none of this would be happening. You'd still be alone but safe. May wouldn't be risking her reputation, and Silas wouldn't have reason to. Stop. Caleb sat across from her. You don't owe Silas Kell your silence. You don't owe him your suffering, and you sure as hell don't owe him your child. But now you're in danger because of me. I'm in danger because men like Silas Kell think they can take what they want without consequences. He reached across the table, waited until she looked at him. You didn't create this situation. You just had the courage to survive it. She wiped her eyes, nodded, and went back to sewing with hands that only trembled slightly. They sat together as the night deepened, and somewhere in the darkness, Caleb knew, Fletcher was making his own plans. The second confrontation came 3 days later, and it came in daylight. Caleb was working near the barn when he saw the rider approaching. Not Fletcher this time, but a younger man on a chestnut gelding, moving with the casual confidence of someone who thought himself welcome. Caleb set down his tools and walked to meet him, aware of Mara watching from the kitchen window. "Help you?" Caleb called when the rider was close enough. The man dismounted, smiling with teeth too white and too many. "Name's Collins. Working for Silas Kell out of Montana, looking for his wife. She ran off with their baby a couple weeks back. Wondering if you've seen her." "Can't say I have." "Pretty woman, dark hair, traveling with an infant. Might have asked for work or shelter." Collins's smile never wavered. "Mr. Kell's real worried. The baby's sick, and Mrs. Kell's not in her right mind. We just want to bring them home safe." "Like I said, haven't seen anyone like that." "Mind if I ask around, talk to your hands, maybe check the house?" "I mind considerably." Caleb crossed his arms. "This is private property, and you're not law, so unless you've got a warrant or a better reason to be here, I suggest you mount up and ride out." Collins's smile finally faded. "Mr. Kell's a powerful man. He's got connections, resources. If his wife is here and you're hiding her, that'll go poorly for everyone involved. And if she's not here, you've just wasted your time threatening me on my own land." Caleb let his hand rest near the pistol at his hip. "Either way, this conversation's done." For a long moment, Collins just stared, measuring Caleb the way a man measures an obstacle. Then he mounted his horse, that false smile returning. "I'll let Mr. Kell know you were so cooperative. I'm sure he'll appreciate it." He rode away at the same casual pace, but Caleb saw him glance back twice before disappearing over the rise. When the dust settled, Mara emerged from the house, Noah clutched tight against her. "He knows I'm here," she said. "Probably." "Then they'll come back, with more men." "Most likely." Caleb watched the empty horizon. "Question is when, and with what intent." That night, Caleb taught Mara to load the rifles in the dark. showed her how to brace for recoil, where to aim if she wanted to stop a man without killing him, and where to aim if stopping wasn't enough. She learned quickly, her hands steady despite the fear in her eyes. "I never wanted this," she said as they cleaned the weapons by lamplight. "I just wanted to be safe, to give Noah a life without violence." "I know." "Do you? Because sometimes I wonder if I'm just pulling good people into my nightmare, if I should have what? Stayed and let Silas kill you both? Run until you collapsed and died in the wilderness?" Caleb set down the rifle he was cleaning. "You made the choice that kept you and Noah alive. Everything else follows from that. Even this?" "Especially this." He met her eyes. "Sometimes the right choice isn't the easy one, and sometimes the easy one is just dying slowly instead of all at once." She nodded, and they finished their work in silence while the house waited and the night pressed close, and somewhere beyond the circle of lamplight, men with bad intentions made their plans. The waiting had begun. And so they waited, but the waiting wasn't passive. Caleb moved through his days with heightened awareness, every sense tuned to the landscape around him. He noted which cattle grazed where, which fence lines offered cover, which approaches to the ranch house could be watched from the windows. He cleaned weapons that were already clean, checked ammunition he'd already counted, and rode the property line twice daily, looking for signs of intrusion. Mara settled into the routine of survival with the grim efficiency of someone who'd done it before. She kept Noah close, rarely venturing beyond sight of the house. When she worked outside, hanging laundry, tending the small vegetable patch she'd started cultivating, feeding the chickens Caleb had forgotten he owned, she positioned herself where she could see the road, the tree line, the ridge to the east. Her hands stayed busy, but her eyes never rested. 5 days passed, then 6. The heat continued relentless, turning the ground to powder and the sky to bleached bone. Thunder rumbled in the afternoons but brought no rain, just empty promises and distant lightning that started brush fires in the hills. On the 7th day, May Hollander returned with her wagon loaded with supplies and information. "Fletcher's still in town," she said without preamble, accepting the coffee Mara poured. "Rented a room at the hotel, spends his evenings drinking at the Silver Dollar. Asked questions about you, Caleb, how long you've been alone, whether you're the type to harbor runaways, if anyone's seen changes at your ranch." "What are people telling him?" Caleb asked. "Nothing useful. Walter Garrison mentioned you hired a cook a few weeks back, but when Fletcher pressed for details, Walter suddenly couldn't remember her name or what she looked like." May's mouth quirked. "Amazing how forgetful folks get when they don't like the person asking." "Has he made any threats?" "Not directly, but yesterday Collins, that's the younger one who visited here, was seen talking to Judge Morrison. The judge is crooked as a dog's hind leg and will rule however the money flows. If Silas Kell has enough resources, Morrison might issue some kind of order." Mara's cup rattled against its saucer. "What kind of order?" "Custody, maybe, or a warrant claiming you're an unfit mother, that the baby needs to be returned to his father's care." May's voice was gentle but firm. "It wouldn't be legal in any real sense, but it would give them the appearance of authority, enough to cause trouble. Then I need to leave before they—" "You need to stay visible," May interrupted. "I want you to come to town with me. Today. Let people see you with Noah, see that you're healthy and clear-minded, see that the baby's thriving. We build witnesses who can testify to your character if it comes to that." That's putting Mara right in front of them," Caleb said. "It's also making her real. Right now she's just a story Fletcher's telling, some addled woman who stole a baby. We make her a person, someone the town knows, and suddenly Fletcher's story gets harder to sell." May looked at Mara. "I won't force you, but I think it's the right move." Mara glanced at Caleb, who kept his expression neutral. This was her choice to make, her risk to calculate. After a long moment, she nodded. "All right, when?" "Now's as good as any." May stood. "Caleb, you should come too. Show folks that you stand behind your employee." They rode into Red Creek in May's wagon, Caleb following on horseback with his rifle prominently displayed across his saddle. The town was busy for a weekday. Ranch hands buying supplies, farmers selling produce, women shopping with that particular determination that came before the long winter. Eyes tracked their arrival, conversations paused and resumed, but no one approached as May pulled up in front of her boarding house. "Come inside first," May said. I want to introduce you to my current guests. The boarding house smelled like bread and lavender, clean and homey in a way that made Mara's shoulders relax fractionally. May led them into a parlor where three women sat sewing, their heads bent over fabric in a puddle of afternoon light. Ladies, this is Mrs. Mara Kell and her son Noah. Mara, these are my long-term residents, Judith Barnes, Sarah Chen, and Ann Whitmore. The women looked up with expressions ranging from curious to warm. Sarah, who appeared to be in her 30s with the weathered hands of a laundress, smiled. The widow from Nebraska, May mentioned you'd arrived. She's working for Caleb Warden, Judith added. She was older, maybe 60, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. About time that man stopped living like a ghost. Noah's a beautiful baby, Anne said softly. She was the youngest, perhaps 18, with a scar that ran from her temple to her jaw and eyes that suggested she understood more about running than anyone should at her age. May I? Mara hesitated, then passed Noah to Anne, who cradled him with surprising competence. The baby gurgled, reaching for her face, and Anne laughed, a sound that transformed her scarred features into something luminous. You're good with babies, Mara observed. I had 3 younger siblings before. Anne's voice trailed off, but she kept smiling at Noah. Before I came here, May's been teaching me bookkeeping so I can support myself properly. All these women have reasons for being here, May said quietly to Mara, reasons that don't need explaining to strangers. You're in good company. They spent an hour at the boarding house drinking tea and talking about everything except the real reason for the visit. Caleb waited outside, watching the street, noting who passed and who paid too much attention. He saw Fletcher once standing outside the Silver Dollar, eyes tracking the boarding house entrance like a hawk watching a rabbit hole. When they finally emerged, May insisted on taking them to the general store. Mara needs to be seen shopping like any normal person, and Walter needs to get a good look at her so his memory stays fresh. The general store was crowded, and their entrance drew immediate attention. Walter Garrison's eyebrows rose when he saw them, but his greeting was cordial. Mrs. Kell, didn't expect to see you in town so soon. Needed a few things, Mara said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. And May was kind enough to bring me. How's that fabric working out? The cotton I sold Caleb? Beautifully. I've already made Noah 3 new shirts. She shifted the baby to show Walter, and Caleb watched the storekeeper's expression soften as he looked at the healthy, content child. He's a fine boy. Growing fast, I'd wager. Every day. Mara moved through the store with May, selecting small items, thread, buttons, a bar of soap, while conversations eddied around them. Caleb heard his name mentioned, heard widow and cook, and seems respectable enough. Building a foundation of normalcy, one mundane interaction at a time. They were loading purchases into the wagon when Fletcher made his approach. He came from the direction of the saloon, moving with deliberate slowness, his face arranged in an expression of concerned friendliness that didn't reach his eyes. Mrs. Kell, what a relief to find you well. Mara froze, and Caleb moved to stand between her and Fletcher, one hand resting on his pistol. You've got no business with her. I've got every business. I'm here on behalf of her husband, who's been worried sick since she vanished. Fletcher's voice carried across the street, drawing attention. Silas just wants his wife and child home safe. That's not unreasonable. My husband nearly killed us both, Mara said, her voice ringing clear. I have the bruises to prove it, and witnesses who saw what he did. I'm not going back. You're confused, ma'am. The trauma of childbirth sometimes affects a woman's mind. My mind is fine. Mara stepped around Caleb, facing Fletcher directly. What's confused is any man who thinks he has the right to claim ownership of another human being. I left because staying would have meant death, for me and for Noah. A crowd had gathered, Walter in the doorway of his store, several ranch hands, 2 women Caleb didn't know, and Judge Morrison himself watching from across the street with calculating eyes. That's a serious accusation, Fletcher said, his tone turning hard. Silas Kell is a respected businessman. You're a woman alone with no proof of these claims. Who do you think people will believe? They'll believe their own eyes, May said, stepping forward. I've seen the bruises, fresh ones and old ones, and I've seen that baby go from half-starved to healthy in the care of his mother. That tells me everything I need to know about who should have custody. With respect, Mrs. Hollander, you're not the law. Neither are you, Caleb said quietly. And you're on my property when you're on this street. Mara Kell works for me. She's under my protection. You want to contest that? You get a legitimate warrant from legitimate law, not some paper from Morrison that's worth less than the ink it's printed on. Fletcher's hand moved toward his gun, and the crowd collectively held its breath. But Walter Garrison's voice cut through the tension. That's enough. Fletcher, you're welcome to drink at the saloon and rent a room at the hotel, but you start drawing weapons in my street, I'll have every ranch hand in this county run you out before sundown. The storekeeper's voice held unexpected steel. We don't tolerate threats against women and children here, not from strangers and not from anyone else. A murmur of agreement rippled through the onlookers. Fletcher's eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation, one man against a town that was rapidly choosing sides, and apparently decided this wasn't the moment for confrontation. Mr. Kell will be disappointed to hear of your lack of cooperation, he said to Mara, but he's a patient man and determined. This isn't over. No, Mara said softly. I don't imagine it is. Fletcher walked away, his back rigid with suppressed anger, and the crowd slowly dispersed. Walter approached Mara with unexpected gentleness. You need anything, Mrs. Kell, anything at all, you come to me, or send word through Caleb. Understand? I do, thank you. They finished loading the wagon in tense silence and rode back to the ranch without speaking. But when they arrived, May pulled Mara aside while Caleb tended the horses. You did well today, the older woman said. You stood your ground, told your truth, and didn't flinch. That matters. It won't stop them from coming. No, but it might make them think twice about how they come. May gripped Mara's shoulders. You're not alone in this anymore. Remember that. After May left, Caleb and Mara worked through the evening chores with a new awareness between them. Something had shifted in town. The abstract possibility of violence had crystallized into inevitability. Fletcher's threat hung in the air like the smell of distant smoke. That night, Caleb found Mara sitting on the porch in the darkness, Noah asleep against her shoulder, staring out at the stars scattered across the Wyoming sky. Can't sleep? He asked, settling into the chair beside her. Every time I close my eyes, I see Silas's face. Not the way it looked when he fell. I see him the way he was when we first married, smiling, gentle. The man I thought I knew. Her voice was hollow. It's worse somehow remembering that he wasn't always a monster, that there was a time when I believed he might love me. People change. Or maybe they just stop hiding what they always were. Which do you think he was? Does it matter? Caleb watched heat lightning flicker on the horizon. Either way, the man you married and the man you left aren't the same person, and the one you left deserves everything he gets. Even death? Especially that, if it comes to it. He looked at her directly. You keep trying to find a way to be sorry for surviving. Stop. You don't owe Silas Kell your guilt any more than you owe him your obedience. Mara was quiet for a long time, her hand moving in slow circles on Noah's back. Eleanor was lucky to have you. I was the lucky one. The words came easier than they had in years. She saw possibilities in everything, in bad weather, difficult land, even in me when I was too young and stupid to know what I had. Lost her too soon to learn half of what she could have taught me. What would she say about this situation? Caleb considered. She'd say that fear is only useful if it keeps you alive. Once you've survived, you have to figure out how to live. And living means deciding what you're willing to fight for. And you've decided I'm worth fighting for. I've decided this ranch is worth defending, that Noah deserves a chance to grow up without violence, that you've earned the right to make your own choices. He stood, moved toward the door. The rest is just details. Caleb? She waited until he turned. Thank you for all of it. He nodded and went inside, leaving her with the stars and the night sounds and whatever thoughts she needed to work through alone. The attack, when it finally came, arrived with the subtlety of a thunderclap. 3 more days had passed, each one winding the tension tighter. Caleb had reinforced the barn door, positioned water barrels for fighting fires, and taught Mara to reload the rifles without looking at her hands. They moved through routines that felt increasingly fragile, waiting for the inevitable. It came on a Tuesday afternoon, the sky hazy with heat and the air so still that sound carried for miles. Caleb was mending fence on the north pasture when he saw the dust rising from the road. Not one rider, but four, moving with purpose toward the ranch. He was mounted and riding hard before they crested the ridge, his rifle already free of its scabbard. He reached the house with minutes to spare, dismounting in a cloud of dust. "Mara, inside now!" She appeared in the doorway with Noah, saw the riders approaching, and disappeared back into the house. Caleb heard the bar drop across the door, heard the shutters slam closed on the windows. He positioned himself on the porch, rifle across his knees, and waited. The four riders spread out as they approached, flanking the house in a pattern that spoke of military training or at least serious intent. Fletcher led them, with Collins on his right and two men Caleb didn't recognize on the left. All were armed. They stopped 20 yards out, horses stamping and blowing in the heat. "Caleb Warden," Fletcher called. "We're here for Mrs. Kell and the baby. This can go easy or hard, your choice." "Already made my choice." "You're not welcome here. We have a court order." Fletcher held up a folded paper. "Signed by Judge Morrison. States that Mara Kell is mentally unfit and that custody of the child Noah Kell is to be remanded to his father, Silas Kell, pending investigation." "Morrison's a drunk and a crook. That paper's worth nothing. It's legal enough. Now bring out Mrs. Kell, or we'll come in and get her." Caleb stood slowly, the rifle coming up with him. "You try to enter my house without permission, I'll drop you where you stand. That's a promise, not a threat." One of the unknown riders, a lean man with a scar across his nose, laughed. "One man against four, I like those odds." "Maybe you should look behind you before you get too confident," said a new voice. Every head turned. May Hollander sat in her wagon on the road, and she wasn't alone. Walter Garrison stood beside her with a shotgun. Two ranch hands Caleb recognized from town flanked them on horseback, both armed, and Sheriff Tom Brennan, retired or not, he still wore the badge, stood with his rifle cradled in the crook of his arm. "Tom," Fletcher said carefully, "this doesn't concern you. Morrison's warrants don't hold water in my territory, even if I am officially retired." Brennan's voice was gravelly with age but steady. "And I don't take kindly to armed men threatening decent folks, especially not women and babies. The woman in question is a fugitive. The woman in question is a mother protecting her child from a violent husband. I've seen the bruises. May's told me the story. And unless Silas Kell himself wants to come here and make his case in person, you boys are going to turn those horses around and ride out of Red Creek." Fletcher's hand moved toward his pistol, and the world balanced on a knife's edge. Caleb could feel his finger tightening on the rifle trigger, could see the calculations running behind Fletcher's eyes. 4 against 6, with more likely to come if shooting started. Morrison's fake warrant against a retired sheriff's real authority. "Silas won't forget this," Fletcher said finally. "Let him remember it," Caleb replied. "And let him know that if he wants his wife back, he can come himself. In daylight, unarmed. And he can ask her permission like a civilized human being instead of sending hired guns to terrorize her. She's his legal wife. She's a free person who made a choice, and you're trespassing." Caleb's voice went flat and cold. "You've got to the count of 10 to be off my land. 1. Fletcher stared at him, at the people arrayed against him, at the house where Mara and Noah waited. "This isn't over." 2. They turned their horses slowly, making a show of choosing to leave rather than being driven off. But they left, dust rising in their wake, and Caleb didn't lower his rifle until they disappeared over the ridge. Sheriff Brennan approached the porch, eyes twinkling beneath bushy brows. "Been a while since I pulled that badge out of storage. Felt good." "I thought you were retired." "I am, but Morrison doesn't know that, and Fletcher's too new to the territory to realize we haven't had active law here in 5 years. He grinned. "Sometimes the appearance of authority is enough." "Not today it wasn't," May said, climbing down from her wagon. "Today we needed bodies and weapons, which is why I sent word to the surrounding ranches this morning. You've got another dozen men willing to stand with you if Fletcher comes back with more." Caleb felt something tight in his chest loosen fractionally. "I can't ask people to risk themselves." "You didn't ask. We volunteered." Walter Garrison approached, shotgun broken open across his arm. "This is our town, our territory. We decide who belongs here and who doesn't. Fletcher and his kind don't belong. The door opened behind Caleb, and Mara emerged with Noah clutched tight. Her face was pale but composed, her eyes dry. "Thank you," she said to the assembled group. "All of you. I don't know how to—" "Don't need thanks," Brennan interrupted gently. "Just need you to keep being a good mother to that boy, and maybe bake one of those pies May says you're famous for." "I'm not famous for anything." "Yet," May said firmly, "but you make Caleb's kitchen smell like a home again, and that counts for plenty." They stayed another hour drinking coffee Mara brewed and eating biscuits she'd made that morning, talking about everything except the confrontation that had just occurred. But Caleb saw how they positioned themselves, always between the road and the house, always watching the horizon, creating a human barrier between Mara and whatever might come next. As the sun lowered toward the mountains and people began drifting back toward town, May pulled Caleb aside. "This bought you time, but it won't end here," she said quietly. "Fletcher's type doesn't give up. He'll go back to Silas, report what happened, and they'll come up with a new plan." "I know. You prepared for what that might mean?" "I'm prepared to defend what's mine." "Mara's not yours, Caleb. She's her own person." "I know that too." He looked at the house, where Mara stood in the doorway with Noah, silhouetted against the lamplight. "But this place is mine, and anyone who tries to take something from it without permission will regret the attempt." May studied him with those sharp eyes that saw too much. "Eleanor would approve. She always said you had more steel in you than you showed." "She saw a lot of things I didn't. Still do, I suspect." May climbed into her wagon. "Keep your powder dry and your eyes open, and if you need us, send word. We'll come." After they'd gone, Caleb walked the perimeter one more time in the fading light, checking for anything out of place, any sign that Fletcher had left surprises behind. He found nothing, but the unease stayed with him as he returned to the house. Mara had put Noah to bed and was washing dishes when he came inside. She worked with mechanical precision, her hands moving through familiar motions while her mind was clearly elsewhere. "You all right?" Caleb asked. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if May hadn't brought help. If it had just been you against them." "I'd have managed." "You'd have died." She turned to face him, water dripping from her hands. "And it would have been because of me. It would have been because of Silas Kell and men who think force gives them the right to anything they want." Caleb took the dish towel, handed it to her. "You keep trying to shoulder blame that isn't yours to carry. Someone has to be responsible. Silas is responsible. Fletcher is responsible. Morrison, for selling his authority to whoever pays, but not you." He waited until she met his eyes. "You ran to save your child's life. Everything after that is just the cost of survival." She dried her hands slowly, carefully, like the motion required all her concentration. "I thought I'd feel relieved, after today, knowing people would stand with us. But I just feel tired, like I've been running so long I've forgotten what it feels like to stop." "Then stop." "I can't. Not while Silas is still out there, not while Fletcher—" "Not forever, just for tonight." Caleb moved toward the stairs. "Get some sleep. I'll keep watch." "You need rest too." "I'll rest when this is done." He paused on the bottom step. "One of us should be alert anyway. Might as well be me." He spent the night in Eleanor's chair by the window, rifle across his lap, watching moonlight paint the landscape in silver and shadow. The house settled around him with familiar creaks and sighs, and somewhere above, Mara and Noah slept in the room that smelled like hope instead of dust. Caleb didn't sleep, but he wasn't afraid. Fear had been his companion for 3 years, constant and suffocating. This new feeling was different, sharp and clear and almost welcome. This was purpose. This was choosing to stand for something beyond simple survival. This was living again, even if living meant walking toward danger instead of away from it. When dawn came soft and pink, Caleb was still awake, still watching, still ready. Mara found him there when she came down with Noah, and something passed between them without words, an understanding that they'd crossed a line yesterday. That whatever came next, they'd face it together, not because they had to, but because they'd chosen to. "Coffee?" she asked. "Please." She moved to the stove and the morning routine began again. But now it felt less like waiting for disaster and more like fortifying against it. building something strong enough to withstand the storm that was surely coming. Because Fletcher had been right about one thing, this wasn't over. Not by a long sight. The storm broke 4 days later, but it didn't come with Fletcher's men or Silas Kell's fury. It came instead as a letter, delivered by a writer who wouldn't meet Caleb's eyes. The envelope was cream-colored and expensive, addressed to Mrs. Mara Kell, an elaborate script that spoke of money and education and the kind of authority that didn't need to announce itself. Mara stared at it like it was a coiled snake, her hands trembling as she broke the seal. Caleb watched her face drain of color as she read, watched her lips press into a thin line, watched something behind her eyes go cold and hard. "He's alive," she said finally, her voice hollow. "Silas. He's alive and he's coming here." "When?" "2 days. He says—" She scanned the letter again, her jaw working. "He says he's willing to discuss arrangements regarding Noah's custody, that he understands I was frightened and confused, that he's prepared to be reasonable if I'm willing to cooperate. He suggests we meet at Judge Morrison's office to work out terms. That's a trap." "Of course it's a trap." Mara crumpled the letter in her fist. "Morrison's already in his pocket. The moment I walk into that office, they'll declare me incompetent, take Noah, and I'll have no legal recourse because Silas is his father and I'm just a hysterical woman who abandoned her husband." Caleb took the letter, smoothed it out, read the careful words that managed to sound both conciliatory and threatening. "He doesn't mention the fall, doesn't acknowledge trying to kill you. Why would he? In his version, I'm the villain, the unfaithful wife who ran off with a baby that might not even be his, forcing him to chase me across 3 territories to reclaim what's rightfully his." She laughed bitterly. "He's probably already convinced himself that's the truth. Silas was always good at rewriting history to suit his needs." "Then we don't go to Morrison's office. We meet him here, on our terms, with witnesses." "He won't agree to that." "He will if the alternative is not meeting at all." Caleb moved to the desk, pulled out paper and pen. "We send a reply. Tell him you're willing to discuss Noah's welfare, but only at the ranch, only in daylight, and only with Sheriff Brennan present as a neutral party." "Brennan's retired." "Silas doesn't know that. And even if he did, Tom's got more integrity in his little finger than Morrison has in his whole body. If we're going to do this, we do it right." Mara watched him write, her expression flickering between hope and despair. "You think it'll work? You think Silas will actually negotiate in good faith?" "No. But I think he'll come anyway, because men like him can't resist the opportunity to prove they're in control. And when he does, we'll have the advantage of terrain and preparation and truth." Caleb signed the letter, folded it carefully. "He wants to play civilized? Fine. We'll give him civilized, right up until he shows his true nature, and then everyone watching will know exactly who he is." They sent the reply that afternoon with the same nervous writer who delivered Silas's letter. Then they prepared. May arrived within hours of receiving Caleb's message, bringing Sheriff Brennan and 2 ranch hands she trusted. Walter Garrison came with his wife Martha, who took one look at Mara and declared she'd be staying until this business was settled. By evening, the ranch had become something between a fortress and a gathering place, with people positioned strategically to observe without seeming threatening. "The trick," Brennan explained as they walked the property, "is to make him feel like he's in control while actually having no control at all. We let him arrive, let him speak his piece, let him think he's negotiating, but we document everything. Martha's going to take notes of the entire conversation. Walter will corroborate, and I'll be there as law, retired or not, making sure everything stays legal." "And if he tries to take Noah by force," Caleb asked, "then we stop him. Legally, if possible, physically, if necessary." The old sheriff's eyes were hard. "But my guess is he won't. Not with this many witnesses. He'll try charm first, then threats, then legal maneuvering. That's how men like Silas Kell operate." The night before Silas's arrival, Caleb found Mara sitting on the floor of her room with Noah asleep beside her, surrounded by the small clothes she'd sewn, the blankets she'd washed, the accumulation of care that marked these weeks together. "Can't sleep?" he asked from the doorway. "Can't stop thinking." She looked up, and her eyes were red-rimmed. "What if I'm wrong? What if I'm being selfish, keeping Noah from his father? What if Silas really has changed, really wants to—" Has he changed? The question hung in the air between them. Finally, Mara shook her head. No. Men like Silas don't change. They just get better at hiding what they are. Then trust that. Trust what you know about him, not what he's claiming to be in a letter designed to manipulate you. But what if the law sides with him anyway? What if Morrison and his money and his connections? Then we'll figure out the next step. But we don't surrender before the fight even begins. Caleb crouched beside her, careful not to disturb Noah. You've come too far and survived too much to give up now. I'm scared, Caleb. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. It's when you stop being scared that you make mistakes. He stood, offered his hand. Come downstairs. May made stew, and Martha's telling stories about her early days homesteading. You should eat something, hear something besides your own worry. She let him pull her to her feet, and they gathered Noah carefully, bringing him down to where the others had assembled around the kitchen table. The conversation flowed around them, stories of hard winters and drought years, of cattle lost and found, of the ordinary struggles that made up frontier life. Mara listened, gradually relaxing into the rhythm of voices and the smell of coffee and the evidence that she wasn't alone in this. My first year here, Martha was saying, we lost everything to locusts. Every crop, every blade of grass, just gone in 3 days. I sat on our porch and cried for 2 hours straight. Then Walter came out and said, well, no point planting fall wheat now. Might as well focus on the spring. Just like that. Like it was a minor setback instead of complete devastation. Was he always that calm? Mara asked. God, no. He just hid it better than I did. Martha grinned at her husband. Took me years to learn he dealt with fear by pretending it didn't exist. Worked for him, drove me crazy. Still does, Walter said mildly. The laughter that followed was gentle, breaking tension without dismissing it. These were people who understood that survival sometimes meant finding humor in impossible situations. That strength wasn't the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear make all your decisions. When the gathering finally dispersed for the night, people bedding down in the barn and the spare rooms, Caleb walked the perimeter one last time. The night was clear and cool, stars brilliant in the vast sky, and somewhere out there Silas Kell was riding toward this confrontation with whatever intentions he'd convinced himself were righteous. Caleb checked his weapons, checked the sight lines, checked everything he could control. Then he sat on the porch and waited for dawn. It came earlier than he expected, the sky lightening from black to gray to pale gold. Mara emerged as the sun broke the horizon, dressed in her best dress, one of Eleanor's, altered to fit. Her hair braided and pinned with careful precision, she looked composed and determined, and only the slight tremor in her hands betrayed her nerves. He'll be here by mid-morning, she said. The letter said 10 o'clock. Then we have time. Caleb poured coffee, handed her a cup. Remember what Brennan said. Stay calm, speak clearly, don't let him provoke you. We're here to establish that you're competent and Noah's thriving. Everything else is just noise. And if he demands I return with him? You refuse, politely but firmly. You're not his property, and neither is Noah. The law might see it differently. The law isn't here. Brennan is, and a room full of witnesses who will testify that you're sound of mind and body, that Noah's healthy and well cared for, and that Silas Kell has no legitimate claim beyond legal paperwork. Caleb watched the road, looking for dust. We built this foundation for a reason. Now we see if it holds. The others gathered as the morning progressed. Brennan positioned himself near the door, looking official in a clean shirt with his badge polished bright. Martha sat at the table with paper and pen, ready to document everything. Walter and May flanked the room, not threatening but present. The two ranch hands stayed outside, visible through the windows, armed but not aggressive. Mara held Noah standing near the window where sunlight caught her profile. She looked strong and certain, nothing like the desperate woman who'd arrived starving and terrified 3 weeks ago. Caleb felt pride swell in his chest. Not ownership, but genuine respect for her transformation. At precisely 10 o'clock, riders appeared on the road. 3 of them. Silas Kell rode in the center on a black gelding, flanked by Fletcher and a man Caleb didn't recognize. They approached slowly, taking in the ranch, the people positioned around it, the careful preparation that announced this wouldn't be easy. Silas dismounted with the fluid grace of someone who'd grown up with horses and money, both. He was handsome in the way dangerous men often were. Sharp features, penetrating eyes, the kind of smile that could charm or cut depending on necessity. He wore expensive clothes that somehow weren't dusty despite days of travel, and he moved with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in any way that mattered. Fletcher and the other man stayed mounted, hands visible but near their weapons. Brennan stepped onto the porch, effectively blocking the door. "Silas Kell?" the sheriff asked. "I am, and you are." "Sheriff Tom Brennan. I'm here to ensure this conversation stays civil and legal." Something flickered across Silas's face. Surprise, maybe, or calculation. "I wasn't aware Red Creek had active law enforcement. We do when necessary. This qualifies." Brennan gestured toward the house. "Your wife has agreed to meet with you, but there are conditions. No weapons in the house. Your men stay outside. And everything that's said gets documented for legal purposes. I'm not armed." Silas spread his hands, showing empty holsters. "And I have no intention of causing trouble. I just want to speak with my wife and see my son." "Then we understand each other." Brennan stepped aside. "After you." Silas entered the house, his eyes immediately finding Mara. Something crossed his face: hunger, possession, a complicated tangle of emotions that made Caleb's hand move instinctively toward his pistol. But Silas's voice when he spoke was gentle, almost wounded. "Mara, thank God you're safe." She didn't respond, just held Noah tighter. Silas took in the room, the witnesses, the careful positioning, the evidence of preparation. His smile dimmed slightly. "I'd hoped we could speak privately." "Anything you need to say can be said in front of witnesses," Mara replied, her voice steady. "I won't be alone with you again. I understand you're frightened. After what happened, after my fall, after you tried to kill our son." The words landed like stones in still water. Silas's expression shifted, hardened, then smoothed back into concern so quickly Caleb almost missed it. "Is that what you believe? Mara, I was trying to help. You were hysterical, not thinking clearly, and the baby was crying so much I thought, you thought you'd fix the problem by eliminating him, because you'd convinced yourself he wasn't yours, despite all evidence to the contrary." Mara's voice gained strength. "You beat me until I could barely stand, then came for Noah. When I tried to stop you, we fought. You fell, and I ran. That's what happened, Silas. Not your version. The truth." "You're still confused. She seems perfectly clear to me," Martha interrupted, pen poised over paper. "For the record, Mrs. Kell, would you say your husband has a history of violence?" "Yes, it started 6 months into our marriage. Small things at first, grabbing my arm too hard, pushing me when he was angry. It escalated after Noah was born." Silas's facade cracked. "You can't prove any of this." "I have bruises that are still healing. May Hollander has seen them, documented them. Sheriff Brennan has witnessed them. I have scars from incidents going back 2 years. Mara shifted Noah, revealing the marks on her arms. "And I have the testimony of neighbors who heard me screaming, saw me with black eyes, knew what was happening, and were too afraid of your connections to intervene." Convenient allegations from a woman who abandoned her husband and stole his child. "I saved my child from a violent father. There's a difference." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Silas stood in the center, surrounded by hostile witnesses, his careful plan unraveling. His eyes moved from face to face, assessing, calculating, looking for weakness. "You've turned these people against me," he said to Mara. "Told them lies, made yourself the victim." "She didn't have to tell us anything," Caleb said quietly. "We saw what she looked like when she arrived, half-starved, bruised, with a baby so weak he could barely cry. That told us everything we needed to know." "And you are?" "Caleb Warden. This is my ranch. Mara works for me." "How convenient. A widow who needs protection, a lonely rancher who provides it. I wonder what else he provides." The insinuation was clear, ugly. May stood abruptly. "That's enough. You came here claiming to want a reasonable discussion about your son. Instead, you're making accusations about a woman's character because she had the courage to leave you. If you have legitimate concerns about Noah's welfare, state them. Otherwise, this meeting is over." Silas breathed hard through his nose, visibly controlling himself. When he spoke again, his voice was measured. "I want my son." Whatever Mara believes happened between us, Noah is legally mine. I have rights as his father. Rights that you forfeit when you attempt to harm your child, Brennan said. Mrs. Kell has witnesses to your violence and Noah's improved condition under her care. Any judge worth his oath would side with her. Morrison will. Morrison's not here, and his jurisdiction only extends as far as his credibility, which in this territory is exactly 0. The sheriff's voice was steel. You want to fight this in legitimate court, with legitimate law, you're welcome to try. But you won't win, not with the evidence arrayed against you. Then what do you propose? The question hung in the air. Everyone looked at Mara, waiting. She took a breath, seemed to gather herself, then spoke with quiet finality. You sign papers relinquishing all parental rights to Noah. You leave this territory and don't return. In exchange, I won't press charges for assault, attempted murder, or any of the other crimes you've committed. You walk away with your freedom. That's more than you deserve, but it's what I'm offering. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. Sign the papers, leave, and this ends. Refuse, and I'll fight you in every legal venue available, with every witness I can gather, until everyone knows exactly what kind of man you are. Silas laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think you can threaten me? You think these frontier nobodies can stand against my resources, my connections? I think, Mara said softly, that you're standing in a room full of people who've seen through your mask. And I think whatever power you have in Montana doesn't reach here. This is Wyoming territory. Different land, different rules, and these people don't scare easily. For a long moment, Silas just stared at her. Then he turned to Caleb. How much? Excuse me? How much to make this go away? Name your price. I'll pay you to convince her to be reasonable, to come back to Montana where she belongs. She belongs wherever she chooses, and you don't have enough money to change that. Caleb's voice was flat. You should leave now, Kel, while you still can. Is that a threat? It's a suggestion, but if you want to hear a threat, I'm happy to provide one. Caleb stepped forward. You came here because you thought you could intimidate Mara into submission. You thought your money and your legal tricks and your hired guns would be enough. But you're wrong. She's under my protection now, her and Noah both. And if you try to take them, if you so much as breathe wrong in their direction, I will end you. Not quickly, not cleanly, but permanently. That clear enough? The room was silent except for the ticking of the clock on the mantel. Fletcher's hand moved toward his gun, but Brennan's voice stopped him. Touch that weapon and you'll be dead before it clears the holster. I might be retired, but my aim's still good. Outside, the ranch hands had moved closer, rifles visible. Inside, every person stood ready. The careful civility had burned away, leaving only raw truth and the willingness to defend it. Silas's expression twisted through rage, calculation, and finally cold acceptance. You'll regret this, he said to Mara. All of you will. Maybe, she replied, but not as much as I'd regret going back with you. He turned and walked out, his back rigid with fury. Fletcher and the other man followed, mounting quickly. They rode away at a hard gallop, dust rising in their wake like smoke. Nobody spoke until they disappeared over the ridge. Then May exhaled shakily. Well, that went better than expected. Did it? Martha's hands were trembling as she set down her pen, because I thought for sure someone was going to start shooting. We all did, Brennan said. But they backed down. That's what matters. Caleb moved to the window, watching the empty road. He's not done. Men like that don't accept defeat. No, Mara agreed quietly. They don't. But the immediate crisis had passed, and in its wake came a strange, exhausted relief. The witnesses gradually dispersed, promising to stay close, to watch for trouble. By evening, only May and Martha remained, helping Mara prepare supper while Brennan and Caleb discussed security measures. He'll try again, the sheriff said. Maybe not immediately, but eventually. Probably when you least expect it. I know. You prepared for that? For the long game? Caleb thought about the ranch, about Mara and Noah sleeping upstairs, about the life that had started growing in the spaces Eleanor's death had left empty. I'm prepared to do whatever's necessary. That might mean killing him. I know that too. Brennan studied him with those sharp old eyes. You've changed, Caleb. 3 weeks ago, you were a ghost haunting your own house. Now you're a man with something to lose again. That's both good and dangerous. Living's always dangerous. I just forgot that for a while. Well, you remember it now. Just make sure you remember the rest too. That living isn't the same as surviving, and sometimes the bravest thing is knowing when to step back instead of forward. But stepping back felt impossible. The confrontation with Silas had crystallized something Caleb had been avoiding acknowledging. This wasn't just about providing shelter to someone in need anymore. Somewhere in the past 3 weeks, between the coffee at dawn and the rifle lessons at dusk, and the 1,000 small moments of shared survival, he'd started caring. Not the way he'd cared for Eleanor. That love was its own country, complete and closed. But this was different. This was choosing to open doors he'd sealed shut, choosing to let someone new matter, choosing to build something instead of just protecting the ruins of what he'd lost. He found Mara on the porch after everyone had gone to bed, Noah asleep in her arms, staring at the stars. "Thank you," she said without looking at him, "for what you said to Silas about me being under your protection. It was true. Was it? Or was it just words to make him leave?" Caleb sat beside her, the night air cool against his skin. 3 weeks ago, if you'd asked me to stand against a man like Silas Kell, I'd have said no. I'd have given you supplies, pointed you toward the next town, and wished you luck. But I wouldn't have fought. And now? Now I'd burn this ranch to the ground before I let him take you or Noah. She turned to look at him finally, her eyes searching his face in the starlight. Why? Because you matter. Because Noah deserves better. Because... He struggled for words. Because I've spent 3 years being dead while still breathing, and helping you survive reminded me what living feels like. I'm not ready to give that up. Even if it means dying for real. Especially then. Better to die defending something worth defending than to keep existing in that gray place where nothing matters. Mara was quiet for a long time, Noah's soft breathing the only sound between them. Finally, she said, "Silas will come back. Not with words next time. He'll bring violence. I know. And you'll stand anyway." "I will." "Then I guess we'd better be ready." She stood, cradling Noah. "Because I'm not running anymore either. Whatever happens, we face it here." She went inside, leaving Caleb alone with the stars and the night sounds, and the certain knowledge that the real fight was still coming. Silas's retreat today was just that, a retreat, not a surrender. He'd go back to Montana, gather his resources, plan his next move. And when he returned, it wouldn't be with reason or legal maneuvering. It would be with fire and blood. Caleb loaded his rifle, checked his ammunition, and settled into Eleanor's chair to keep watch. The house breathed around him, full now instead of empty, and he understood with sudden clarity that this fragile community they'd built, this stubborn refusal to let fear win, this was worth every risk. Tomorrow would bring its own troubles. Fletcher was still in town, watching and waiting. Silas was out there somewhere, nursing his wounded pride and planning revenge. And the whole careful structure they'd built could collapse with one wrong move, one moment of inattention. But tonight, Mara and Noah slept safely under his roof. Tonight, the ranch felt like a home instead of a monument. Tonight, for the first time in 3 years, Caleb Warden had something to lose that made the losing worth risking. And he'd defend it with everything he had. The attack came 5 nights later, in the dead hours when the moon had set and dawn was still a distant promise. Caleb woke to the smell of smoke. He was out of bed and reaching for his rifle before conscious thought caught up with instinct, his bare feet hitting the floor as the acrid scent sharpened. Not wood smoke from a fireplace, not the distant smell of a campfire. This was wrong. Immediate, dangerous. The barn. He was down the stairs and shouting Mara's name before he cleared the last step. She appeared in her doorway, Noah clutched against her chest, eyes wide with fear. "Fire," Caleb said. "Get dressed, grab what you need, and be ready to run if I tell you to." "The barn?" "Probably. Stay inside, bar the door behind me, and don't open it for anyone but me or May." He was already moving toward the door, pulling on boots, checking his weapons. "If you hear gunshots, take Noah and go out the back window. Head for the creek, follow it south to town. Don't stop, don't look back." "Caleb!" But he was already gone, stepping out into darkness thick enough to choke on. The barn was indeed burning, flames licking up the eastern wall where the hay was stored, smoke billowing into the starless sky. And silhouetted against the firelight, Caleb could see them. 4 men. Fletcher, Collins, and 2 others, all armed, all positioned between the burning barn and the house. They'd planned this carefully. Fire to draw him out, men positioned to trap him in the open, probably more waiting in the darkness to flank if he tried to retreat. It was a good plan, the kind that would work against most targets. But Caleb had spent 3 years studying this land, learning every shadow and approach, preparing for threats that had never materialized. Until now. He moved left instead of forward, using the water trough for cover, his rifle up and tracking. The flames were spreading fast, consuming dry wood and decades of accumulated hay, heat building to an intensity that threatened the house itself if not controlled soon. "Caleb Warden," Fletcher's voice carried over the crackling fire. "Send out Mrs. Kell and the baby, and we'll let you save your barn. Fight us and we burn it all. Barn, house, you inside it." Caleb didn't answer. Talking gave away position, and position was all he had right now. He'd counted 4 men in the firelight, but that didn't mean there weren't more. Silas wouldn't have sent just 4 against the opposition they'd shown last time. Movement to his right confirmed it. A 5th man creeping along the fence line, trying to get behind the house. Caleb adjusted his aim, waited until the figure passed an opening in the smoke, and fired. The crack of the rifle shattered the night. The man went down hard, and all hell broke loose. Fletcher and his men opened fire, bullets chewing into the water trough, splintering wood, filling the air with the whine of lead. Caleb dropped flat, rolled, came up behind a corner of the house, and returned fire. He saw Collins stumble, saw another man dive for cover behind the well. Then the house door opened and Mara was there, rifle in hand, Noah secured in the sling across her chest. Before Caleb could shout at her to get back inside, she'd braced against the doorframe and started shooting with methodical precision. Her first shot took Fletcher in the shoulder, spinning him around. Her second shattered the lantern one of the men was carrying, plunging that section of the yard into darkness. Her third caught the man behind the well in the leg, sending him sprawling. "Get back inside," Caleb roared. "You need help," she shouted back, reloading with hands that didn't shake despite the baby strapped to her chest. And she was right. 2 against 4, now 3, with the man Caleb had dropped, was better odds than 1 against 4. Even if it meant Mara was exposed, even if every instinct screamed at him to protect her. They fought in grim coordination, Caleb covering the left approach while Mara held the right, the burning barn casting everything in hellish orange light. The remaining attackers realized quickly that this wasn't the easy ambush they'd planned and began falling back toward the tree line. That's when Caleb heard the horse. A single rider, coming hard from the road, and for a terrible moment he thought it was reinforcements, but the voice that rang out was female and furious. "You sons of bitches picked the wrong night!" May Hollander charged into the firelight on her old mare, a shotgun in one hand and her reins in the teeth, looking like an avenging angel carved from leather and spite. She fired both barrels into the darkness where the attackers had retreated, the boom echoing across the valley. Behind her came more riders. Walter Garrison, Sheriff Brennan, and 3 ranch hands, all armed, all bearing down on Fletcher's position like the wrath of a righteous frontier god. The attackers broke completely, scrambling for their horses, abandoning the wounded Collins and the man Mara had shot. Fletcher was the last to retreat, clutching his bleeding shoulder, his face twisted with rage and pain. "This isn't over, Warden," he screamed. "Silas will—" Whatever Silas would do was lost as Brennan fired a warning shot that passed close enough to Fletcher's head to make him flinch. The remaining attackers vanished into darkness, hoofbeats fading into the distance. Caleb lowered his rifle, suddenly aware he was shaking. Mara emerged from the house fully, Noah wailing now from the gunfire and chaos, her face pale but determined. "The barn," she said. It was fully engulfed, flames reaching 20 feet into the air, heat so intense they couldn't get within 30 yards. They formed a bucket line from the creek anyway, wetting down the house and the surrounding structures, containing the damage even though the barn itself was lost. They worked through the rest of the night, exhausted and smoke-blackened, while Collins and the other wounded man were bound and guarded by Brennan's volunteers. Dawn came gray and hazy with smoke, revealing the full extent of the damage. The barn was gone, collapsed into a pile of smoldering timber and ash. But the house stood intact, the other structures saved, and most importantly, everyone was alive. May found Caleb standing in the ruins, staring at what had been his grandfather's barn, built 50 years ago when this land was still contested territory. She didn't say anything, just stood beside him until he was ready to talk. "Eleanor and I were married in that barn," he said finally. "Wasn't fancy enough for a church wedding, but she said she didn't care. Said it was about the people, not the place."
She was right. I know, doesn't make it easier to watch it burn. Nothing worth having is easy. You know that better than most. May touched his arm. But you're alive. Mara and Noah are alive. The house stands. Everything else can be rebuilt. Caleb nodded, knowing she was right but still feeling the loss like a physical weight. He'd survived so much. Eleanor's death, 3 years of grief, the loneliness that ate at him like cancer. This should have felt like just another loss. But somehow it hurt more, because now he had something to compare it to. Now he remembered what it felt like to have something worth protecting. Sheriff Brennan had Collins and the other wounded man secured in the barn's surviving tack room by the time Caleb made his way back to the house. Mara was inside with Noah, both of them cleaned up but exhausted, dark circles under her eyes making her look fragile despite the steel he knew lived in her spine. "They're talking," Brennan said without preamble. Collins, especially, seems being shot and abandoned by his employer loosened his tongue considerably. "What'd they say?" "That Silas hired them to retrieve you and the baby, by force if necessary. The fire was meant to flush you out, make you vulnerable. Fletcher was supposed to grab you in the confusion while the others kept Caleb busy." Brennan's expression was grim. "Collins says Silas is camped about 10 miles north with 2 more men. He was planning to wait there until Fletcher brought you to him." "Planning?" Mara asked. "Past tense?" "I sent riders to the territorial marshal in Cheyenne last night, soon as the shooting started. They should reach him by tomorrow, and he'll have federal authority that supersedes anything Morrison or Silas can manufacture." Brennan smiled without humor. "Meanwhile, I'm holding Collins and his friend on charges of arson, attempted murder, and assault. That'll keep them locked up until the marshal arrives." "And Fletcher?" "Wounded and running. Won't get far with that shoulder, and every ranch between here and the Montana border knows to watch for him." The sheriff poured himself coffee. "But the real question is, what do we do about Silas himself?" The room fell silent. They all knew that Silas was the head of this particular snake, and until he was dealt with, the threat would continue. He'd just hire new men, try new approaches, wear them down through attrition and resources they didn't have. "I'll go to him," Mara said quietly. "Absolutely not," Caleb said immediately. "Hear me out. He wants to talk, to negotiate, or at least he claims to. What if we give him that chance? Under controlled circumstances, with witnesses on neutral ground. We bring the territorial marshal if he arrives in time, or we bring enough armed support that Silas can't try anything without consequences." She looked around the room. "We end this, one way or another." "That's too dangerous," May protested. "May Tieton, you'd be putting yourself right in his hands." "I'd be putting myself in front of witnesses with legal authority and armed protection." "That's different than being alone with him." Mara's voice strengthened. "And I'm tired of running, tired of waiting for the next attack, tired of living in fear. If there's a chance to resolve this without more violence, I have to take it." "And if he won't negotiate in good faith?" Walter asked. "Then we have witnesses to that too. And the marshal will have grounds to arrest him for conspiracy, attempted kidnapping, arson, all of it." She looked at Caleb. "But either way, this ends. I won't spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder." Caleb wanted to argue, wanted to lock her in the house and face Silas himself. But he saw the determination in her eyes and recognized it for what it was. Not recklessness, but courage. The same courage that had let her run through wilderness with a dying baby, that had let her stand on his porch with a rifle and fight for her freedom. "All right," he said finally, "but we do it smart. Brennan sends word to Silas that we're willing to meet, but only at a location of our choosing with neutral observers. And we bring enough firepower that if he tries anything, it's the last mistake he makes."
They chose a clearing 3 miles from the ranch, visible from the road, but far enough from town that innocent people wouldn't be caught in crossfire if things went wrong. Sheriff Brennan sent the message to Silas's camp with strict conditions. Noon meeting, no more than 3 people on each side, and the territorial marshal's representative would be present as neutral authority. Silas's reply came within hours. He agreed. The day of the meeting dawned clear and hot, the kind of late summer day that promised thunderstorms by evening. Mara dressed carefully, choosing one of Eleanor's simpler dresses, her hair pulled back severely, every inch of her presenting competence and clarity. Noah stayed with Martha back at the ranch, protected by 6 armed volunteers who'd sworn to defend him with their lives. The separation nearly broke Mara. Caleb watched her hand Noah over to Martha, saw the way her whole body tensed as the distance between them grew, saw the effort it took for her to turn away and walk to the wagon. "He'll be safe," May said gently. "Safer than if you brought him to face Silas." "I know. Doesn't make it easier." They rode to the meeting place in a wagon driven by Walter, with Caleb on horseback alongside and Brennan bringing up the rear. The clearing came into view just before noon, and Caleb's hand moved instinctively to his rifle when he saw Silas already there. But Silas had honored the conditions. He'd brought only Fletcher, arm in a sling, face tight with pain, and one other man Caleb didn't recognize. They stood near their horses, Silas looking calm and collected despite everything that had happened. And standing slightly apart from both groups was a man in a dark suit with a federal marshal's badge pinned to his vest. He was older, maybe 50, with iron gray hair and the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades enforcing law in places where law was more suggestion than certainty. "Marshal Hendricks," Brennan said, dismounting, "didn't expect you personally. Got the message about attempted murder and arson, figured it warranted attention." Hendricks' eyes moved between the two groups. "Now, someone want to tell me what the hell is going on here?" Mara stepped forward before anyone else could speak. "My name is Mara Kell. That man," she pointed at Silas, "is my husband. He's been trying to take custody of our infant son by force, including burning down Mr. Warden's barn and attempting to kill us last night. I'm here to offer him one final chance to walk away peacefully." "That's an interesting version of events," Silas said smoothly. "My wife suffered a breakdown after our son's birth. She became convinced I meant her harm, fled into the wilderness, and has been living in delusion ever since. I've simply been trying to bring her home where she can receive proper medical care." "Is that so?" Hendricks pulled out a notebook. "And you felt the best way to provide medical care was through hired guns and arson?" "I hired men to locate my wife. What they did was beyond my control or instruction." "Collins says different, says you paid him explicitly to retrieve Mrs. Kell by any means necessary." Hendricks flipped through his notes. "Also says you've been paying Judge Morrison to issue false warrants and manufacture legal authority you don't actually possess." Silas's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "Collins is a criminal trying to bargain for leniency. His testimony is worthless." "Maybe. But I've also got statements from Sheriff Brennan, May Hollander, Walter Garrison, and about a dozen other citizens who witnessed your hired men attacking Mrs. Kell and Mr. Warden's property. That's a lot of worthless testimony." Hendricks looked at Mara. "Ma'am, you want to show me those bruises they mentioned?" Mara hesitated, then rolled up her sleeves. The marks had faded since she'd arrived at Caleb's ranch, but they were still visible, yellow and green shadows of violence that had once been purple and black. She unbuttoned the top of her collar, revealing finger-shaped bruises around her throat that were more recent. "Those are from the night I left," she said quietly. "He was choking me when Noah started crying. The sound distracted him long enough for me to break free. That's when I ran." "She's lying," Silas said, but his voice had lost its smooth confidence. "She always bruised easily. I never—" "You have bruises that match strangling," Hendricks interrupted, looking at Mara. "That's assault. Potentially attempted murder. And you're saying this happened in front of the child?" "Noah was in the room. I don't know what he saw. He was only 6 weeks old." "And after you left, Mr. Kell, you pursued your wife?" "I tried to find her. She was my wife. My responsibility." "She was running for her life," Caleb interjected. And instead of respecting that choice, you hired men to hunt her down, terrorize her, and burn my property when she refused to cooperate. That's not a concerned husband. That's a criminal. Silas's mask finally cracked completely. You self-righteous frontier trash. You think you can stand against me? I have money, connections, influence. I'll bury you so deep. Threats in front of a federal marshal, Hendricks observed mildly. That's bold. It's not a threat. It's a promise. Mara is mine. The baby is mine. And I'll do whatever it takes to... To what? Mara's voice cut through his rage like a blade. To kill me? To eliminate Noah because you've convinced yourself he's not yours despite looking exactly like your brother? To destroy anyone who tries to help me because your pride can't tolerate a woman choosing freedom over your control? You don't get to choose. You're my wife. I was your wife. Past tense, you lost that right when you put your hands around my throat. You lost it when you came for our son with murder in your eyes. You lost it when you chose violence over everything else. She took a step forward, and Caleb tensed, ready to intervene if Silas moved. But Mara wasn't finished. I'm offering you one chance, Silas. One. You sign papers relinquishing all parental rights to Noah. You return to Montana and never contact me again. In exchange, I won't press formal charges for assault, attempted murder, or any of the other crimes you've committed. The marshal will still charge you for the arson and the attacks here, but that's between you and the law. As far as I'm concerned, you'll be dead to me. That's the deal. Take it or spend the rest of your life in territorial prison. Silence fell across the clearing. Hendricks watched Silas with the patient attention of a man who'd seen this scene play out in various forms throughout his career. Fletcher looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. And Silas looked like a man whose entire worldview was crumbling around him. You can't do this, he said finally, but the words were hollow. I already have. The only question is whether you're smart enough to accept reality. Mara's voice gentled fractionally. You could have been a good father, a good husband, but you chose anger and control instead. That's on you, not me. I'm just choosing to survive the consequences of your choices. The baby, Noah, he's my son. He's a child who deserves better than a father who tried to kill him. And if you actually care about him at all, you'll let him go. For a long moment, Caleb thought Silas might lunge at her, might try one final act of violence despite the witnesses and the law. But Fletcher touched his employer's good arm, murmured something too quiet to hear, and Silas seemed to deflate. Where are these papers? He asked, his voice empty. Hendricks produced documents he'd prepared based on Brennan's descriptions of the situation. Silas read them with shaking hands, his jaw working, his eyes bright with what might have been tears or might have been rage. Finally he signed, the scratch of pen on paper loud in the still air. You'll regret this, he said to Mara. Someday, when Noah asks about his father, when he wants to know why, I'll tell him the truth. That his father was a violent man who couldn't control his anger, and that I loved Noah enough to protect him even when it cost me everything. She took the signed papers from Hendricks, folded them carefully. Goodbye, Silas. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for, but you won't find it with us. Silas mounted his horse with Fletcher's help, moving like a man who'd aged a decade in an hour. The third man with him looked relieved as they turned their horses north, back toward Montana and whatever life Silas had waiting there. Hendricks watched them go, then turned to Mara. You know those papers aren't strictly legal without a judge's approval. You'll need to file them properly in territorial court. I know, but having his signature is a start. And with your testimony about the circumstances, any judge with sense will uphold them, especially with the evidence of violence and the witness statements I'll be collecting. He tipped his hat. You're a brave woman, Mrs. Kell. Not many would stand up to a man like that. I didn't have a choice. Everyone has choices. You just made better ones than most. He turned to Caleb. You'll need to rebuild that barn. I can recommend some contractors in Cheyenne who work fast and fair. Appreciate it. Hendricks mounted his horse, paused. For what it's worth, I've seen a lot of domestic situations in my years as marshal. Most don't end this cleanly. You two did good work here. Both of you. He rode off, leaving them standing in the clearing with Brennan, May, and Walter. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then Mara's knees buckled, and Caleb caught her before she hit the ground. "I've got you," he murmured. "It's over. You're safe." "Noah, I need to see Noah. We'll go right now. Come on." They rode back to the ranch in the warm afternoon, thunder rumbling in the distance as the promised storms built over the mountains. Martha was waiting on the porch with Noah in her arms, and the moment the wagon stopped, Mara was running to her son, gathering him close, tears streaming down her face. "It's done," she whispered into Noah's dark hair. "It's over. We're free." The volunteers who'd been guarding the ranch cheered, and someone started passing around a bottle of whiskey in celebration. But Caleb stood apart, watching Mara with her son, feeling the last 3 weeks catch up with him in a rush of exhaustion and relief, and something else he wasn't quite ready to name. May found him near the remains of the barn, staring at the charred timbers. "You're going to rebuild it." "Have to. Can't run a ranch without a barn." "That's not what I mean." She waited until he looked at her. "You're going to rebuild all of it. The barn, yes, but also the life you've been avoiding since Eleanor died. You're going to let yourself have this, whatever this is between you and Mara. You're going to stop punishing yourself for surviving." "It's not that simple." "It's exactly that simple. You love her. Maybe not the same way you loved Eleanor, but it's still love. And you have a choice. You can honor Eleanor's memory by dying slowly inside, or you can honor it by living the kind of full life she wanted for you." May gripped his arm. "She'd want you to be happy, Caleb. You know that." He did know it. Eleanor had been many things, but selfish wasn't one of them. She would have wanted him to move forward, to find new reasons to wake up in the morning, to fill the house with life instead of ghosts. "I don't know how," he admitted. "Yes, you do. You've been doing it for 3 weeks already. You just have to keep going." That night, after the volunteers had left and the ranch settled into quiet, Caleb found Mara in the kitchen. She was washing dishes with Noah asleep in his crate nearby, and she looked up when he entered with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Too much to think about." She dried her hands. "Caleb, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." "All right. What happens now? Silas is gone, the threat is over. I have enough money saved from my wages to get to Cheyenne, maybe start over somewhere. Is that what you want?" "I'm asking what you want." He crossed to the window, looked out at the darkened landscape that had been his whole world for 42 years. 3 weeks ago, I was half dead and didn't even know it. Everything in this house reminded me of what I'd lost, and I was too tired to care about changing it. Then you showed up with Noah, and suddenly there were reasons to fix things. Reasons to cook decent meals and open windows and remember what it felt like to have purpose. That doesn't answer my question. I want you to stay. He turned to face her. Not because you owe me or because you have nowhere else to go. Stay because you want to. Because this place feels like home to you. Because... He struggled for the right words. "Because I'm not done learning how to live again, and I'd like to do that with you here." Mara's eyes filled with tears. "I can't replace Eleanor." "I'm not asking you to. What Eleanor and I had was complete in itself, but that doesn't mean there isn't room for something new, something different." He moved closer. "I care about you, Mara. About Noah. I want to see him grow up, want to help you build whatever life you're trying to create. If you'll have me as part of it." "As what? Employer? Friend?" "As whatever you're comfortable with. I'm not going to pressure you or expect anything you're not ready to give, but if you want to stay, if you want to make this place your home too, I'd like that." She wiped her eyes, laughed shakily. "A month ago I was running through wilderness with a dying baby, convinced I'd never be safe again. Now you're offering me a home, a future, a life without fear. It doesn't feel real." "It's real. Maybe not perfect, maybe not simple, but it's real." "Then yes." She smiled through her tears. "Yes, I'll stay. For Noah, for myself, and because I've spent enough of my life running from things. I'd like to try running toward something instead." The following weeks fell into new patterns, ones built on choice rather than necessity. Mara took over the household completely, not as an employee but as a partner in maintaining the ranch. Caleb began rebuilding the barn with help from Walter, and the other ranchers, the sound of hammers and saws filling days that had been too quiet for too long. Noah grew steadily stronger, his cries becoming laughs, his eyes tracking movement with increasing awareness. And somewhere in the space between those daily routines, something shifted between Caleb and Mara. It started small. Hands touching as they passed tools, conversations that stretched past midnight, moments when their eyes met and held a beat too long. Nothing rushed, nothing forced, just the slow building of trust and affection between two people who'd both learned that love could hurt as much as it healed. 3 months after Silas signed the papers, with autumn painting the mountains gold and red, Caleb found Mara in the garden she'd planted, Noah playing in the dirt nearby while she harvested the last of the vegetables. "Marshall sent word," he said. "Silas's case went to territorial court. He's been ordered to pay restitution for the barn and to stay out of Wyoming under penalty of arrest. Your custody of Noah is legally confirmed." Mara sat back on her heels, a smile breaking across her face. "It's really over. It's really over." "Then I guess I should make this official." She stood, brushed dirt from her hands. "Caleb Warden, would you consider courting me? Properly, I mean. Not just whatever this comfortable friendship we've been doing is." He laughed, surprised. "I thought you'd want more time. After everything with Silas, I've had time. And I've learned that waiting for the perfect moment means missing the good ones happening right now." She moved closer. "You're a good man, patient, kind, strong when it matters. And I've spent 3 months watching you be gentle with Noah, watching you rebuild not just a barn, but a life. If you're willing to share that life with someone as damaged as me, you're not damaged, you're surviving. There's a difference. Then we're both surviving, and maybe we could survive better together." Caleb kissed her then, soft and careful, tasting sun and earth and the promise of futures neither of them had dared imagine. Noah made a delighted sound from his patch of dirt, and they broke apart laughing. "I think he approves," Mara said. "Good, because I was planning to ask him permission anyway." They stood in the garden with the mountains rising behind them and the ranch spread out below, two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of their separate griefs and built something new from the ruins. It wasn't the life either of them had planned, but it was honest and hard-won and theirs. The barn was finished by the first snow, larger than the old one and built with wood that still smelled fresh and full of promise. On the day they celebrated its completion, half the territory seemed to show up. Neighbors who'd become friends, friends who'd become family, all of them gathering to mark not just a structure, but a transformation. May cornered Caleb near the food tables, her eyes twinkling. "Eleanor would be proud of the barn, of how you've rebuilt, of everything." "You think?" "I know. She always said you had more love in you than you knew what to do with. Just took the right person to help you remember." May nodded toward Mara, who was showing Noah to a group of admiring women. "That's the right person." "I know." "Then don't waste any more time pretending otherwise. Life's too short and too hard to spend it alone when you don't have to be." Caleb proposed that night, in the kitchen where Mara had first made him coffee, with Noah asleep upstairs and the new barn standing solid against the winter wind. It wasn't fancy, just a simple gold band that had been his grandmother's, offered with words that came from somewhere deeper than rehearsal. "I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a few months, and you're still healing from everything with Silas. But I love you, Marakel. I love your strength and your courage, and the way you make this house feel alive again. I love how you are with Noah, and I love that you're teaching me how to hope for things again. Will you marry me?" She said yes with tears streaming down her face, and they held each other in the lamplight while snow began to fall outside, covering the land in white silence. They married in the spring, when the creek ran high with snowmelt and wildflowers carpeted the meadows. May officiated, Sheriff Brennan gave Mara away, and Noah, 9 months old and already trying to walk, served as the world's most enthusiastic ring-bearer. The ceremony was simple, the vows honest, and when Caleb kissed his new wife, the assembled crowd cheered like they'd won a war. In some ways, they had. The ranch prospered over the following years. The cattle multiplied, the land yielded its bounty, and the house that had been a tomb became a home filled with laughter and life. Noah grew strong and healthy, learning to ride and rope and handle the land with the same care Caleb had learned from his father. And in time, 2 more children joined him, a daughter named Eleanor who had her mother's dark hair and her father's steady eyes, and a son named Thomas, who laughed at everything and feared nothing. Mara never spoke of Silas after that final meeting. The signed papers stayed in a locked box in the bedroom, proof of freedom hard won but not dwelt upon. She built a new life from the ashes of the old one, becoming not just Caleb's wife but a vital part of the community, delivering babies, nursing the sick, offering shelter to those who needed it the way Caleb had once sheltered her. And Caleb, who had spent 3 years convinced his capacity for love had died with Eleanor, discovered that the heart was more resilient than he'd imagined. He loved Mara differently than he'd loved Eleanor, but no less deeply. It was a love built on shared survival, on choosing each other daily, on the understanding that sometimes the bravest thing was simply opening the door when someone knocked. 20 years later, standing on the porch of a ranch that had been rebuilt and expanded and filled with more life than it had known in generations, Caleb watched the sun set over the mountains and thought about the journey that had brought him here, about a desperate woman arriving with a dying baby in the heat of late summer, about learning to live again when living seemed impossible, about the stubborn refusal to let fear win. Mara joined him, her hair now touched with gray, her hands still strong from years of work. She slipped her hand into his without speaking, and they stood together in comfortable silence. "Any regrets?" she asked finally. "Not a single one." "Not even the barn?" He smiled. "Especially not the barn. Needed rebuilding anyway." She laughed, the sound as familiar now as his own heartbeat. Inside, their children were arguing over something trivial, Noah's voice rising above his siblings in the way of eldest children everywhere. The house was warm and full and alive, exactly as it should be. "Thank you," Mara said quietly, "for opening the door that night, for giving me a chance when you had every reason not to. Thank you for knocking, for reminding me that surviving isn't the same as living." They watched the stars emerge one by one across the vast Wyoming sky, 2 people who'd found each other in darkness and built a life in the light. The ranch stretched around them, solid and enduring, a testament to the truth that sometimes the things worth having are the things you have to fight for. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the fight leads you exactly where you need to be. Home.